Well, good evening from the News Radio, 1120 AM and 93.7 FM, KPNW studios, and streaming online at kpnw.com. I'm Bill Lundun, host of the Wake Up Call, which you can hear every morning, 6 a.m. to 9 on this fine radio station. Yeah, I call myself Bill Lundun, but some people call me Einstein's dumber brother. I've got this hair thing going today. Before we get into what I would call the hardcore, I'm going to read this kind of news, a couple of things. Number one, of course, for you folks that are living in Montana, this is not something that is a big deal you're dealing with, but a lot of Oregonians are still digging out from the big ice storm. We still have areas of Lane County that don't have power. A lot of Cresswell still doesn't have power. A lot of Springfield still doesn't have power. We're just about a little under 1,000 people in, or actually customers in Eugene that don't have power. So there's a lot of just carnage, particularly in, areas that would be considered a little more rural, like I mentioned Cresswell. Now, Rick had mentioned last week that he and his family had a home on Deerhorn. So this is for you, Rick. I'm calling an audible. And for everybody else, on our Facebook page, it's Wake Up Call 1120. If you go to that, we posted video from one of our regular listeners, a guy by the name of Frank Travis, who lives up Deerhorn and that particular stretch in the McKenzie Valley. It's about 3 minutes long, and I will just tell you, it looks like the Tunguska Blast. It's amazing. And so, Rick, if you haven't seen the drone footage yet, go to our Wake Up Call and look at it. And if you want to share it, go ahead. It's astounding, the damage that this particular ice storm did. Also, along with that, before I get into the actual newsy news, one of the things that's also going on here is looting. Now, I know you're going to go, looting. Well, maybe not looting, but it is definitely theft, and it's our community members who like to use methamphetamine or live on the streets or do both. What they're doing is they're going and stealing the copper and the lines that the utility companies are trying to put up and repair. Essentially, oh, look, the lines are down, which makes it much easier for them to steal it. They're also breaking into the utility companies' rigs, stealing their tools and other equipment, which is only extending these outages more. Another thing that's going on, and I'm going to suggest this because if you're a homeowner that lives in the local area, is you need to chain your generators. And I'm not talking about with little hinky chain. I'm talking about the stuff that you're basically going to need a carbide cutter to get through kind of chain. Because once again, our criddlers, as I like to call them, that's a word I learned not all that long ago, criddlers. They're stealing generators. As a matter of fact, 4 generators were stolen from the crossing guards on Union Pacific Rail around the Eugene-Springfield area. And they were using that, particular up on Jasper Road, because they had no power. So they were using the generators to bring, flash the lights and bring the arms down. And they were out there stealing those. And they're being stolen from all over. I was in Jerry's just a few days ago because we need to get some stuff for the stations here because we're dealing with some storm damage. And one of the guys I was working with, I asked him because we needed some chain, and he goes, "Oh, you lost your generator?" I'm like, what? And he goes, "You would be surprised how many generators that we've sold to people that had theirs stolen, and other people that caught people in the act of stealing their generators coming in for chains to tie them down." So if you haven't secured your generator, essentially our members of the community who use meth are walking by your house and saying, "Oh, look, free generator. I'll take that. That'll be mine." So just note that. Then I'm going to throw this in on top of it. Lane County yesterday sent out an alert because according to the National Weather Service, next week around Tuesday, at least is the extended forecast, assuming the extended forecast holds, we're going to get another one of these atmospheric rivers rolling through the area, Lane County, that's going to bring with it really heavy rain and also potentially heavy winds. And what they're suggesting is if you live in the Lane County area, now would be a good time to restock your emergency kit, or if you haven't created one, to do it now, because their fear is more downed trees coming right after the ice storm, which are already weakened, and also local area flooding and power outages. Now, they're not saying it's going to happen, but they're trying to warn people at this point that there is a likelihood that we will have this atmospheric river that's going to roll through. And so instead of being caught flat-footed, like everyone or many people were during the ice storm, is to give yourself a chance to prepare for it now. And by the way, all of this news tonight is brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratlin at Chris Dental. Okay, here's Newsy News. This has got to be my favorite news story. Lewis and Clark College. Now, that's up there by Portland. Lewis and Clark College is in what are called deep discussions whether to change the school's mascot from Pioneers, because some people feel the name is, and I'm quoting the college, inextricably linked with settler colonialism. Now, that is according to college president Robin Holmes Sullivan. So far in this process, they have put together a 19-member steering committee. They're holding community meetings and doing online surveys. And the committee is going to present a recommendation to Holmes Sullivan this spring, who will make the final call as to whether to change the mascot to something else from Pioneers at Lewis and Clark College. Just let that sink in. It's Lewis and Clark College. I mean, if you're going to go to that length, because, Lewis and Clark were kind of pioneers. And by the way, I've had people quibble with my definition of pioneers. My definition is actually a dictionary definition, which is part of the definition is first people into an area or exploring and making inroads into new areas. And under that definition, which I agree with, Lewis and Clark were pioneers. Anyway, that's my favorite news story of the week because it's dumb. This would be my second news story. Now, I just went through kind of a preamble here dealing with ice storms and all that good stuff. One question that's being asked by the political types in Salem right now is if Democratic lawmakers are going to attempt to revive Senate Bill 525 from last year's truncated legislative session after the walkout. Now, we have a short session that'll be coming up, a 5-week session starting early in February. And people are like, well, is Senate Bill 525 going to come back? Well, let me tell you about 525. That bill was drafted to ban gas generators and gas chainsaws and gas lawnmowers and gas leaf blowers. The bill was sponsored by, go figure, Portland area Democratic legislators who believe two things. That, those things cause climate change and they're noisy. So if that bill had passed, many people who use those generators to stay warm and keep their neighbors warm and prepare food and save the food that was in their refrigerators from thawing out and going to waste, well, those people would have literally been out in the cold. That's my second favorite story of the week. All right. Oregon 4th Congressional District candidate Monique Despain held a press conference today asking, and I'll quote, what is Congresswoman Val Hoyle hiding from the public in the LaMotta scandal? Additionally, Despain has now sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon, Natalie White, to expand the current investigation by her office into LaMotta and the resigned ex-Secretary of State Shemia Fagan. She says it needs to be expanded to Hoyle. Despain has also launched a website, which is fun reading, whatsvalhiding.com, where you can pretty much view a fairly comprehensive timeline of what Despain calls Hoyle's corruption, and also sign a petition for the U.S. Department of Justice to formally investigate Val Hoyle's role in that whole LaMotta scandal. And it goes on and on and on. We talked about the short legislative session coming up. Well, let's talk about Oregon's failed experiment into drug decriminalization, also known as Ballot Measure 110. Well, according to what is being released right now by the people leading the conversation, it will have minor tweaks as Democratic lawmakers try to save the measure that's enabled increasing crime, like stealing stuff from the power companies that are trying to get your power back on, also has increased public drug use, overdoses, drug use among teens and children, and majority Democrats on Tuesday unveiled a proposal that would make the possession of user amounts of drugs like fentanyl, methamphetamines, heroin, and all the rest of them the lowest misdemeanor possible. It's House Bill 4002, crafted by Senate Majority Leader, Democrat from Portland, Kate Lieber, and State Representative, Democrat from Bend, Jason Krupp, both supporters of Ballot Measure 110. Now, here's what they claim this will do. And this, oh boy, we're talking about big difference this is going to make. They say now people caught with user amounts of drugs would have repeated opportunities to skirt a criminal conviction and charges altogether in exchange for having a face-to-face meeting with a service provider. All they have to do is meet. They don't have to get into any kind of drug cessation or abatement program. They just have to sit down and go, yeah, I use drugs. Nice to meet you. Okay, I'm going to go out and buy me a few rocks. The misdemeanor charge in and of itself is akin in Oregon to getting a traffic ticket in severity, and that is according to Oregon statute. The Democratic lawmakers say they want to make it easier for the drug users to get things like meds to treat withdrawal symptoms, which are already easily available. They want to dedicate even more money than is being spent on this project to bolster treatment. How many hundreds of millions do they need that they don't already have that aren't being used to really treat anybody? But they want to expand it even more and create what they call sober housing and other needed services. The product of that effort, HB 4002, is being hammered not only by decriminalization advocates, but also law enforcement and DAs and even now members of the public. And they're facing with all sorts of backlash, and now the possibility that a more hardline proposal, rolling back Measure 110, is going to land on the ballot in November. Lieber, though, and Krupp view their proposal as a grand compromise. Groups that still advocate for Measure 110 claim, among other things, that this bill, which does nothing, is, and I'm quoting them, detrimental to communities of color. Tara Hurst is the executive director of the Health Justice Recovery Alliance, which is a group that fought and dumped millions of dollars of outside state money into getting Ballot Measure 10 of course, passed voters and passed into law, and they're fighting tooth and nail to preserve it right down to the letter because it's doing so many wonderful things. According to Ms. Hurst, we tried to change a racist system, and with 4002, it's snapping back. Okay, when you've got a crap bill, or in this case, a crap measure that is obviously killing people on the streets, that is increasing crime, when you want to try to preserve a bad idea, all you have to do is say, well, that's not racially equitable. That's the new thing. Remember, it used to be, we're doing it for the kids. All right. Anyway, law enforcement groups and others who are more hard line on this say that this plan doesn't go far enough. Now, the state's district attorneys, police, Republicans, and others who look at this law and say it's stupid, say that it should be a Class A misdemeanor, the most serious kind, which is punishable up to a year in jail, because only more severe potential consequences will be sufficient to prompt people to accept help, they argue. Now, if you go to court on this lower level misdemeanor, the way that it is now with 4002, you'll get sentenced to a maximum of about a week in jail. So what would you rather do? Would you rather go into drug treatment or just tough it out for 7 days and then go back out and buy a bag of rocks? The Republicans are offering an alternative bill to 4002, but you know darn good and well, because the Democrats rule everything in the Capitol, it won't even get a hearing or even a reading because, well, it's just too harsh. These are members of our community that are committing crimes and ODing and dealing drugs and, giving them to our kids. All right, I've gone on long enough. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to start screaming. With that, Rick, roll out whatever you want to call real tonight. Have at. And by the way, thank you, Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental, for bringing my little rant vest.